Hi, thanks for your company today. If you're into music, no matter where you live, you're sure to know the band that's the focus of this episode. They were an R&B group that only played pop to get on the charts, and they ranked among the most adept British invasion acts in both styles. Vocalist Paul Jones lent them his voice, and while he was known as one of the strongest and most adaptable singers in rock and blues, it was their keyboardist after whom the band was named, Manfred Mann. Paul Jones went on to have a lengthy career as an actor after the band's demise. Here he is to share his story.
Thank you for having me.
That's absolutely our pleasure, and you've been requested by lots of our listeners. One in particular, Rick, who lives in Ballina, beautiful Ballina in New South Wales here in Australia, has asked to chat with you. So maybe guys just say hi to each other.
Hello, Rick.
Hello, Paul.
Nice. Paul Jones, we all know you from your Manfred Mann days because, of course, you were one of the founding members of that band. But you've done so much more, and I just want you to tell us all about it. Perhaps we start off with how you came to those heady heights in the 60s with Manfred Mann. What were you doing before that?
Well, I hadn't long dropped out of university, actually. And I decided to do that because I knew already that what I wanted to do was music, and studying English literature wouldn't do me any good, really, in that chosen profession. So I started to sort of hang out with as many musical people as I could, notably Alexis Korner, who was the sort of hub of blues in Great Britain. In the early 60s. I used to, in common with a whole load of other people, including members of the Rolling Stones and the Animals and so on, we used to stand along the front of the stage when Alexis Korner's band, Blues Incorporated, was doing a gig. And we would stand there looking sort of hopeful with eyebrows raised, so that Alexis Korner would point at one of us and say, "Get up on here." And you would get up on stage and do whatever song you could persuade them to do. It was very exciting. Anyway, I carried on doing that for a while, and I got an audition for a dance band. And I thought, well, you never know, I might get it. And I did. Around about the same time, Brian Jones, who obviously came with me, in fact, he lived near me, so we joined forces and would go to Alexis Korner's gigs. He said, "I'm going to form a band, and I want you to be my singer." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do that, Brian." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, first of all, you are unduly optimistic. You think you're going to become rich and famous. You don't get rich and famous playing our music. Secondly, I've just got an audition with a dance band, and they've got actual money. They will pay me." So I went with the dance band, and he went with Mick Jagger. I learned a lot from being in that band.
So you obviously regretted your decision not joining Brian in a band, but you also
never regretted that for one moment in my
you?
life. Not for one moment.
How come?
Well, because by the time they got anywhere, I was getting somewhere as well. At that stage, we were sort of more or less level pegging with the Stones. And in subsequent years, there was nothing that made me wish I'd got Mick Jagger's job. First of all, if I had joined Brian's band, it would never have become the Rolling Stones.
Right.
You had to have Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to be the Rolling Stones. And so that was one thing. And the other thing was, I've actually enjoyed my career. I see them doing this and that and more of this and a lot more of that. And I don't wish I ever was in that situation. The next time somebody said, "We're forming a band, do you want to be the singer?" I said yes. And that, of course, was Manfred Mann.
Just before you get to Manfred Mann, you talk very humbly about attending university, but perhaps not many people know that it was actually Oxford University. Your parents must have been really upset with you when you decided to drop out and follow music as a career, were they?
My father possibly was. He regarded himself, and I suppose he was, really, a self-made man. He was until a few years ago. I don't know whether his record has ever been equaled or broken, but he was the only man in the history of the Royal Navy who worked at every level in the Navy. starting as the lowest of low, and he became a senior captain. He actually finally failed to become an admiral. But at that point, no one had reached senior captain who had ever started as a. No, some had. Famously, Lord Nelson did.
Didn't
My
he?
father was a little bit disappointed. He said, "Well, what do you think you're going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to make a living as a musician." And he said, "Well, here's £5. Good luck."
Wow. In 1962, you joined the Man Blues Brothers. Blues was your first love, wasn't it?
Yes, blues and gospel, actually.
So what happened when you joined that band?
Well, they were jazz musicians. There were six jazz musicians. And they said, "Well, we need a shouter." That was a jazz musician's expression for a guy who sang in front of a big band, actually. That's what they called Jimmy Rushing and Big Joe Turner and people like that. I said, "Okay, well, I'll have a crack at it." And I was a big jazz fan. So I was actually very happy and really rather made up. My first job really was to teach them some blues because they didn't really know much. And obviously, they knew the blues chord sequences because jazz musicians have to, but they didn't really know much. And I went in there and I taught them Muddy Waters songs and Howling Wolf and T-Bone Walker and people like that.
So you were with the Man Blues Brothers. How did the renaming come about to be called Manfred Mann?
Well, actually, sometime in early 63, the man hug part was dropped and we were called the Blues Brothers. I found it hard to convince people that that was the case, but somebody did actually send me some facsimile photographs of some tickets that he had in his collection from gigs he'd come to. And sure enough, we were called the Blues Brothers, featuring Paul Jones. So that was how we auditioned for EMI Records in 1963. It was mostly my songs of my composition that we did on that audition. But the guy from EMI Records, who was to become our producer for the next 3+ years, he said, "Well, we like the band, but you're going to have to change the name because no one will ever get anywhere with a stupid name like the Blues Brothers." And of course, we
They
did.
did.
And we said, "Well, we'll think up a name." And he said, "No, you don't need to think anything up. You're called Manfred Mann from now on." And we said, well, hang on a minute. You can't call the band by one member of it. And they said, "Yeah, we can. It's the best name for a band we've heard for years." So we had no choice. We said, "Okay."
And you went with it. It wasn't long after that that you scored your first British hit.
That's right. We had a couple of things that didn't make the charts. But as a result of Ready, Steady, Go liking the band, it suddenly became a really roller coaster thing. The second single that we put out, which wasn't a success, was a song of mine called Cock a Hoop. And Ready, Steady, Go invited us to come on the program and perform Cock a Hoop live on TV. And we did that towards the end of November 1963. While we were there, they said, "Would you guys be interested in writing us a signature tune for the program?" Because they were using an ordinary, already released record as their sig tune. And they said, "We really would like to have one, specially written for the program." So we said, "Yes, okay, we'll do that for you." We went away and within a few days, we had written a song called 54321. They said they wanted a countdown. They said they wanted the rhythm that we used on the song Cock a Hoop, which was a Bo Diddley rhythm, bam, ba-dum, ba-dum, bam, bam, that one. And we used that and the countdown that they insisted on, and one or two other things that they told us. It was a bit like doing a commercial, actually, a jingle. Anyway, we did it, and we went in and recorded that. A couple of weeks after that, they had us on the program, opening the program with that piece of music. And a couple of weeks after that, it was in the charts. 6 weeks from sort of being absolutely nobody to having a top 5 record.
Describe the time that was, because that was obviously the time when the British invasion was really gearing up. So music was just central to every young person's life at the time, wasn't it?
Yes, but Ready Steady Go wasn't just about music. It was about, clothes, makeup, dance moves, and anything else that might be of interest to a
Right.
teenager. Yeah.
Popular culture generally.
Mhm.
So life changed for you, as you say, in a matter of just a few weeks. What did that change mean to you as part of that band?
Well, I do remember that I used to go to our regular Monday night gig at the Marquee Club in the centre of London, Soho. And I used to go by bus from Hampstead, where I lived. And on that particular Monday, our manager rang round the band and said, it's come into the charts. It's come into the top 30 at number 29. And I said, great, I'm a star. And I rang a taxi to take me to the gig. After that, I don't really remember anything much else. Obviously, things change, yes, but as far as what we were doing, it didn't really change at all. We just turned up at the gig and played.
But you must have had more people turning up to adore you.
Yeah, well, yes, but actually, we'd built up a few residences, several towns on the south coast of England, where most of us came from, except for Manfred, who was from South Africa. But we had those residences, and we had the residency at the Marquee Club, and those places were packed every time we played. So it wasn't a sort of major change in our working life.
Right. You just kept on playing. Of course,
Except we got more television programs as well and
but
recognition.
and you'd have to think more money.
Yeah, it,
And
it wasn't a great sort of mountain of money in those days, but
yeah, of
anyway,
course, more girls chasing you down the street.
some of that.
Did you like that?
Uh, why not? Yes,
as he
actually,
as he
it
looks
could get
around to see
a
if his
bit
wife's there.
dangerous.
What do you mean?
It actually got a bit dangerous one time. There was a girl trying to cut some of my hair off. She was brandishing scissors, and all these other girls were sort of fighting her out of the way, and she was sort of going no, and the scissors were going like this, all over the place. And Tom McGuinness, bless him, grabbed hold of the girl's wrist and removed the scissors from her hand and said, "Don't. You might get his eye instead of a lock of his hair." So, but I mean, those kind of moments like that made you think, I'm not quite so sure about this adulation business.
Right.
I think it was the result of a slightly boozy lunch. So I had said to Tim, over the pudding, that I thought that the brouhaha about the Sex Pistols, I wasn't criticizing them in any way as a band, but I said the brouhaha about them is extreme and undeservedly so, because actually, if you took one of their songs and recorded it by Matt Monro, you would see that it was actually a relatively conventional song. And Tim said, "You mean you could sing Pretty Vacant in the manner of Matt Monro?" And I said, "Of course I could." So he went and booked the session immediately. I said, "I don't mind doing this with you, Tim. I think it's really a funny thing to do." I said, "But I don't want it coming out under the name Paul Jones." He said, "What name do you want to put it out under?" I said, "John Holsom, Holsom. It's the opposite of Johnny Rotten."
You're kind of the epitome of that blue-eyed blues, aren't you? And as the years went on, that's exactly what you started to do. You formed a blues band, and
Yes.
you mentioned earlier that you'd kept that going for a number of years.
Well, actually, I did start the blues band because I'd been making my career as an actor for 10 solid years. I decided to start the blues band because I was actually so missing playing the blues. So I got the guys together, and that was that.
But playing blues wasn't going to elicit any major radio hits, was it?
Yeah, we had a very small hit with a version of Bob Dylan's Maggie's Farm. That was partly because we had a prime minister called Maggie at the time. We weren't there for hit records. We were there to play the blues and satisfy anybody else who wanted to hear the blues. And we found that there were masses and masses of people. I'm still meeting people who say, oh, what a sad thing that blues band is no more. Stuff happens 43 years. A band can stay together for 43 years. It must be doing something right. But on the other hand, it's also time to do something else.
That band ran from 1980. I know that in 1982, former Human League members Martin Ware and Ian Craig Marsh invited you to lend vocals and harmonica to cover a song called There's a Ghost in My House. Their album that they were putting together was electronic reworkings of the hits of the 60s. You were obviously very happy to lend your voice and name to that?
Well, it was just like all the other sessions that I got offered actually at the time. Actually, they hired me to play harmonica behind Tina Turner on Ball of Confusion, which, if I'm mistaken not, was a Temptations hit. They said, while you're here, we need somebody to sing There's a Ghost in My House. So I said, okay, I'll have a crack at that too. So out came those two. The album was called Music of Quality and Distinction. They actually put out the Tina Turner track as a single. It was a different mix from the one on the album.
So during that period also, you're playing with the blues band, you are doing a whole lot of sessions, and then in 1991, all of a sudden, a new band emerges for you called the Manfreds. Tell us about that, the genesis of that.
Tom McGuinness, whom I dragged into the Manfreds in 1963, and actually who was the first person I telephoned when I decided to form a blues band in 1979. He was celebrating his 50th birthday, and he thought, I'm going to have a really good celebration. I'm going to assemble every band I've ever played in one place, and that's a gig. He actually didn't get all the bands. The very first band that he played in any kind of professional or semi-professional capacity was a band called the Roosters. There were two guitar players in the Roosters, Tom McGuinness and Eric Clapton. Tom could not get Eric Clapton, or he couldn't get the Roosters back together. They were all over the world. But he did get the Manfreds, the blues band, McGuinness Flint, which was successful thing after the end of Manfred Mann in 1969. And because McGuinness Flint were there, the chief songwriting team within McGuinness Flint was Gallagher and Lyle, and they did that gig instead of the Roosters. So we had all four of those bands, all featuring Tom McGuinness, and it was a cracker of an evening.
Whatever happened to Manfred himself?
Manfred's actually still very successful. They married a Norwegian lady, and that's where he now lives. And that's why people think he's not doing much. But every so often, he puts a tour together and goes on the road, and he's got a cracker of a band. Manfred Mann's Earth Band has had a whole variety of other people in it.
Yes, that's right.
But the current lineup is absolutely spiffing, and he goes out all across Europe and sometimes further abroad as well, but he's still very, very successful.
Manfred Mann was born Manfred Sepsi Lubavitz in South Africa. Originally influenced by jazz music, he formed the Earth Band in 1971. The band's US breakthrough came in 1977 when they charted at #1 with a cover of Bruce Springsteen's Blinded by the Light. I like to bring in Rick from Ballina, one of our listeners now, because I know that Rick had a couple of questions for you, Paul, if that's okay. Rick?
You had a brief association with Jack Bruce, with Manfred Mann. I was just wondering if you could comment on where he took music.
It was briefer than I would have liked it to be, but he joined Manfred Mann in order to replace Tom McGuinness on bass. Tom had joined the band on bass, but Tom is actually a guitarist. Tom had been sort of 3 years in the band on bass. And Mike Vickers, who at that time was playing saxophone and guitar, but not simultaneously, left the band. So we had no guitarist. So Tom said, I'll replace Mike Vickers because I am, after all, a guitarist. So replace me with a bass player. And it was Manfred who actually persuaded Jack Bruce to leave John Mayall and join Manfred Mann. I stayed friends with Jack because I was already friends with Eric and vaguely knew Ginger Baker. So I kind of stayed friends with them. I was actually responsible for Jack Bruce recording with Eric Clapton. They put the record out as Eric Clapton's Powerhouse, but to be absolutely honest, it was a band that I put together, and I actually got Eric and I got Jack, and I tried to get Ginger, and Ginger said, I'm not doing it, and I'm not going to tell you why. Later on, I found out why. It was because Cream were already rehearsing.
Paul Jones is now in his mid-80s, but you'd never guess that, either looking or listening to him.
I eat sensibly. I warm up my voice before gigs. I'm not a fanatical exerciser. I don't go to a gym or anything. I do look after myself. I mean, I do take a multivitamin and things like that, yeah.
Is there anything left on your bucket list? I think you've had about 37 solo albums. You've played with the most incredible artists from, as you mentioned, Eric Clapton to Percy Sledge to Joe Bonamassa. Is there anything left that you still want to accomplish?
Yeah, I'm still moving into sort of areas of music that I haven't really done much. One is big bands. Somebody approached me about 3 years ago now and asked me if I would like to do a gig with a big band. Eventually I thought, yeah, okay. And this guy said, right, I'll write all the arrangements. And we did this big band gig and it was great. I've got some more coming up. I'm also working with smaller groups with a kind of jazz influence. So we're having sort of evenings of jazz and blues mixed. That's good fun as well. Jules Holland books me every so often to work with his big band as well. I love it.
Of all your songs in your back catalogue, is there one that you particularly like that we should go out on now?
Wow. Do you want a hit?
I want whatever's closest to your heart.
I've got an album out which is called Paul Jones, The Blues. It's a compilation of previously issued material. There's a song on it, and that was produced by a lady in California called Carla Olson. I got Eric Clapton to play on the title track of the album, but also on one other track. And that is a song called Choose or Cop Out. And I always say when we do it live, ladies and gentlemen, please pay attention to the words because they are why I wrote this song.
Paul Jones, thank you so very much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Sandy. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.